Portugal, like Spain and Greece, was a dictatorship until the middle of the 1970s.
All three dictatorships had similarities and differences. In Greece, it was a military junta of generals. In Spain, El Caudillo General Franco, the flamboyant fascist whose thousands of graves are still being uncovered. And then there was the forgotten man, the Portuguese dictator Salazar.
Antonio Salazar ruled Portugal from 1932 to 1968, when he was succeeded by his protege, Marcelo Caetano. The whole show was overthrown in the Portuguese Carnation Revolution in 1974.
There's a whole generation of people who've never heard of Salazar. And so, 51 years after his death, the new book, Salazar, the Dictator Who Refused to Die, by Tom Gallagher, emeritus professor of politics at Bradford University, is more than timely, as is his joining us on board the Sputnik. Professor Tom, thanks for joining us. For that generation that's never heard of him, how do you sum up the personality, the ontology of Salazar?
He's often seen as a fascist, but he was more of a traditional conservative. He didn't want to shake up his country, engage in revolutionary wars. He wasn't gripped by any kind of ethnic fanaticism. He basically was a pessimist who'd seen Portugal turned upside down by sectarian conflicts, failed radical experiments, and thought that a long period of recovery in which the Portuguese were encouraged to be civic, mild, moderate in their approach to issues was what was needed. So, you know, he offered a long period, some would say stagnation, oppression, you know, to try and wean the country away from its addiction to radical experiments.
It's, you know, ontology is important. You say he's called a fascist, but imply that he wasn't one. A fascist is someone who seeks the revolutionary overthrow of the existing order and its reordering behind a personality, usually, an idea. Always. He didn't seem to have many ideas other than negatively to be against what some might call modern ideas.
He distrusted all ideologies. He basically believed that the types of people who were drawn into politics were unstable, opportunistic people who left society in a far worse state than it was founded. So he wished for the governance of Portugal without politics, an emphasis on on gradual modernization. He believed in liberty, but he felt that liberals got in the way, that they were too disruptive, too obsessed with with experimenting, too wrapped up in their own careers. So the human element needed to be taken out of politics. He was a technocrat, he was an economist, very unusual for someone with his background to rise to the top and to stay around in power for so long. In a paradoxical way, he bears some resemblance to those on the left, technocrats, globalists, who believe in elites, who feel that censorship is necessary in order to keep the wrong people out of politics, who distrust popular sovereignty. So, he was a kind of elitist, a traditional elitist, not like the kind of, elitists concerned with corporate power and might today, but there are parallels.
You're right about, of course, as you would be as a scholar of note, about his background being unusual. To my surprise, I learned from you that he was educated, in fact, a star pupil at Oxford University, and that he was an economist rather than a jackbooted army man.
Well, he got an honorary degree from Oxford, but he was educated at the Oxford of Portugal, which is the University of Coimbra. So he was an intellectual, a very smart man who was good at manipulating people, at charming, at intimidating when necessary. He had very cool nerves. There were quite a number of occasions during this marathon stint in power when it looked as if the game was up for him, his enemies had encircled him, but he managed to outfox them on every occasion. So he was a very skilled political creature, but he left a wasteland politically behind him. He came to the conclusion in the 40s and 50s that only he could really see Portugal avoid communism, avoid becoming a dependency of the Americans, and he left no successors, he left no political structures, and it was relatively easy for that regime to be swept aside.
We know Portugal extremely well, probably spend more time there than in any other country other than Great Britain. And I have to say that there is literally no trace left behind of a dictator who ruled for so long. Not even the base of a statue like Ozymandias. There's nothing there that would tell you that once upon a time a man called Salazar ruled supremely here.
But during his heyday, the regime wasn't putting up statues in his honor. He was a kind of self-effacing authoritarian figure. Unlike many of the other European dictators, he still has quite a large following, mainly on account of the fact that he is perceived, even by his opponents, as being an honest man who didn't loot the country. Power was his aphrodisiac, and he took care of all his own private bills in his official building, the electricity, the phone bills for his private quarters were paid out of his rather modest salary. So, I mean, the democracy has survived now for as long as the dictatorship, and it's to the credit of the Portuguese. They proved Salazar wrong. They showed that they could handle competitive politics.
Well, he was, of course, a proponent of colonial territories, although he saw Goa gone under his rule. One of his mottos during his reign was God, fatherland, and family. Was that something that echoed and had an impact on the Portugal people at the time?
Well, yeah, I mean, he was a nationalist. That was his primary political creed. He believed that the family was the bedrock of society, though his economic policies meant that many people from conservative rural Portugal had to leave because he was suspicious of too rapid modernization to find a better life abroad. One myth about Salazar that really needs knocking on the head is that he was a servant of Mother Church, that he was a tool, a willing pawn of resurgent Catholicism in Portugal. Most of the anti-clerical changes that had been introduced before he took over, he retained. When a new concordat with Rome was signed by the military in 1975, they only needed to change one sentence in what Salazar had done. So he was very much a secular dictator, even though in his personal life he was seen as a monastic figure, a celibate someone who never married, thought that personal relationships got in the way of ruling the country. But there was no love lost between him and the Catholic Church, which will be a surprise to quite a few people.
It is. Clerical fascism would have been most people's auto reference to the Salazar period. So that is one of the many interesting things in the book. Just in the seconds we have left, when oil was discovered in Angola, then Portugal's colony, he said, "Oh, what a pity." He really was a man trying to hold back a bit like De Valera in the long era of post-Irish independence, don't you think?
I think he was a more effective modernizer. I mean, Portugal was a shambles in 1930. Terrible, third world living standards, mortality, literacy. It did develop substantially under Salazar, but effectively he was a 19th century politician who distrusted universal suffrage, who thought it was a joke to give an illiterate peasant any say in the ruling of the country. So, he thought that the country should be ruled by university professors, and we can see far and wide what a wrong-headed idea that is, and economists, people, with titles, with qualifications. So he wanted to be a good ruler for the common man and woman, but he didn't want them to rise to any position of prominence. So he was from another era altogether.
Professor Tom Gallagher, thanks for explaining your splendid new book, which I hope is read widely. Thank you for joining us on board the Sputnik.
Thank you very much, George.